Hi, welcome to Lean Blog Interviews. I'm Mark Graben, your host, and today our guest is Jenn Christison. She is founder and principal consultant at her firm, 7 Ways Consulting. Jenn has spent the last 15 years leading continuous improvement efforts across a variety of industries, including aerospace manufacturing, healthcare, and that was some of the context and how I met Jenn, nonprofit, pharma, and tech. So she is guided by the principles of respect for people and continuous improvement. She brings a wealth of experience to her work, helping organizations achieve meaningful transformation. Now, her journey began, and I'm going to ask, well, first off, Jenn, let me say welcome to the podcast before I read a little more on your bio. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Mark. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's good to have you on the show. And we met through the Healthcare Value Network activities and conferences. That's going back 15, about those 15 years you've been leading continuous improvement efforts?
10 years. Yeah, I should probably update my bio. Maybe it's been closer to 20 years by now.
Okay. More than 15 years.
Plenty of years.
Okay, so 15, maybe 20. Okay, yeah. But it's good to reconnect, here on the podcast. I'm going to ask Jenn her lean origin story, as I have done recently, but she describes her career journey as beginning with the desire to change the world as 1, a teacher, 2, a social worker, 3, a stand-up comedian. And she discovered her biggest impact could be leading organizational transformation. Was that a tough decision between the 3, or you still dabble in comedy, right?
I very much a dabbler in comedy, very, very off behind the scenes, occasional open mic nights. Easy choice, given it's hard to get over stage fright. I mean, I'm over it now, but it's easier to lead transformations than to consistently be funny. I think.
Okay. Maybe we'll talk about how lessons from these kind of weave together. One of the reasons we are talking here is, and I want to hold this up and say congratulations to Jenn. Thank you for sending me the new book available now, Even Better Leadership, Provocative Reflections to Guide Improvement. So congratulations on that. I was happy to see you announce that on LinkedIn, and I'm glad we're talking about it today.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you so much for being willing to give it a perusal and talk about it. I'm excited.
Yes, it's perusable. Well, that's a word I've never said.
It's definitely perusable.
So we'll talk about the book and the story behind it, and the approach and the format is unique. It stands out. But before we talk about book origins, I mean, what's your continuous improvement origin story?
Yes. Wow. So many years ago, technically speaking, I started with Lean with the Boeing company on the defense side at the F-22 Assembly Center. Before I knew I had exposure to Lean, I think probably technically it was when I was a barista at Starbucks. We just, at the time, we didn't call it anything like that. So put myself through college, all of those principles of standard work and being very specific in how you do things. And then after Starbucks, when I was a contractor on behalf of Boeing, we did a lot of continuous improvement work. Again, no jargon, no terminology, but once I got to Boeing as an employee engagement specialist, so I worked with frontline leaders and teams on all things conflict resolution, team building, you name it, people development stuff to help make work easier and better. We were partnered with Lean consultants at the time, so kind of a little mini cross-functional team. And about 6 months into my career there, they merged the job. So they cross-trained all of us. And so once I got cross-trained in Lean, I was like, oh my goodness, there is terminology and language for the way I like to approach work. This is amazing. So kind of stumbled into it, actually, like I think a lot of people do. I work with a lot of industrial engineers at Boeing, so that was a very fortunate experience there.
Well, on behalf of industrial engineers, I'm glad you had a good experience.
Oh, love industrial
working
engineers.
with them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I mean, what did you study? I mean, because I think, lean and continuous improvement is better when we have people from different backgrounds and disciplines.
Yeah, so I studied society, ethics, and human behavior. I have an interdisciplinary studies degree. So I am very into the people stuff. And
Yeah.
prior to starting my professional career, I did AmeriCorps. So very
Mhm.
much a, service learning, volunteering, roll up your sleeves and partner with folks to get stuff done kind of person. So
Mhm.
that's how I kind of got into the employee engagement type work. So I had a background in all things team building, team development, that kind of flavor of people leadership
Mhm.
versus the technical process improvement. But kind of always a bit of a nerd in that way. I like things to be done a certain way. So I
Mhm.
took to it very well, even
Yeah.
without an industrial engineering background.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've met a lot of people in different settings with from different backgrounds, healthcare backgrounds, software backgrounds, liberal arts degree backgrounds, and they're just kind of wired in a way where lean or continuous improvement ideas resonate with them.
Absolutely. And I will say, growing up, my dad was a chef and I loved watching cooking shows as a kid too. So, anyone who knows their way around a kitchen, especially like an industrial kitchen,
Yeah.
you know that process is everything. And
Right.
working, it's an orchestra, it's an art and a science at the same time. And so, I think just being exposed to all of that growing up, just like, yeah, you got to find the best way to do things. You got to know what your
Mhm.
recipe is. You got to prep your work. It just
Yeah.
makes things go better. Um,
And I mean, the little bit I've dabbled in cooking classes, they talk about the idea of taste what you're cooking, which to me is part of a PDSA cycle. I mean, you have a recipe, you have a plan. Sometimes there's variation in ingredients or herbs or spices, and sometimes you have to taste and adjust.
Absolutely, and clean as you go. Let's not forget about having a tidy workstation. So yeah, I could get into all sorts of very specific, nerdy and fun improvement concepts.
Well, I'm here for that. That's what that's
Yeah,
what this
that's kind of what this is.
Yeah, no,
Yeah. Well, I
we
would.
have time. We have time.
We have time. I mean, I was just excited that you didn't immediately invite me to discuss my favorite mistake. So good to know that, like, with the book launch, it didn't immediately go to, oh, maybe she's ready to talk about mistakes, or at least starting giving the book a chance before I reflect on maybe some regrets.
We could do an episode of my favorite mistake though sometime, if
We've
you
all got
like.
those.
But then, I mean, I think the other thing you probably learned, and I don't speak French, but I'm going to try to do my best. Mise en
Mm.
place,
Oh, oui, je
which is
parle
like
français un peu. Mm.
an
Oui, mise en place, very important.
application of sort of like 5S, or staging your materials in advance so we're not scrambling around, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Have those diced onions ready to go.
Hmm.
You got to do it.
But a real chef would, and I watch some of these cooking videos online, like a real chef wouldn't buy pre-diced onion though.
Well, no, but the home cook might.
Home
Right?
cooked.
Depends on your quality tolerances.
Yeah.
Right? Like if you at least just want the onion flavor, well, at that point maybe just onion powder. But anyway,
Yeah.
we won't go there.
Yeah. But so you're talking about some of that early education or practice of lean. I'm happy that you mentioned easier and better, because I mean, I think a lot of organizations are just focusing on better, which might be organization focused, where I think easier benefits employees and the organization ultimately.
Oh, absolutely. And that's one reason I feel so fortunate that I started my lean journey with the Boeing company is they were really the folks who taught me were really focused on the Toyota production system
Mhm.
aspect of things and really focused on the respect for people and the pillar of Judoka being all about helping remove people from work that is dirty, dangerous, or dumb. That
Mm.
was the framework. And so
Yeah.
there's a lot of ways to demonstrate respect, a lot of ways to make work easier. And yeah, not having people do stuff that is dangerous or overly frustrating or just
Right.
like stupid that they don't want to do is great. And how many of
Yeah.
us, I think we all have those experiences of for any part of our works, like there's got to be a better way. Why can't we
Mhm.
just like eliminate the parts of this that are lame so that we can focus our creativity on the parts that we like or just parts that are satisfying.
Yeah. And that's where, it comes down to people. I mean, I've heard people talk about, and maybe this is recovering from us engineers, but the people side of lean. I'm like, well, what, I don't know what else there is. I mean, there's some math sometimes. Okay, sure. There are some technical tools, but people can't use those technical tools or, move forward with ideas they have unless the environment allows them to. So, I'm curious what you learned either at Boeing or other steps along the way, of about creating that culture where people can speak up, where people can try new things.
Yeah, that's a big question. I think early in my career, the fact that my role as an employee engagement specialist was all about, they had a framework called high performance work teams. And different organizations, you call it different things, different flavors over the years. I think now in healthcare, some people are calling it microsystems. There's a lot of different names for self-directed teams, of having the cross-functional folks closest to the work be the ones who are improving the work.
Right.
So inherently, that was what I was hired to do, was to help make sure that those closest to the work were well equipped to do and improve the work. And so inherently, we got together to talk about fundamentally their ideas on how to improve the work. Like, it was not somebody else's idea. It was literally, how do we remove the interpersonal barriers for people improving their work? How do we make it easier? And I'm sure there are other corporate reasons, cost reasons, right? There's always a lot of reasons. But at the end of the day, in my role, I was focused on the people stuff. And it was 100% about how do we make your life easier and how do we communicate kinder or more effectively. And those things matter. I mean, it fundamentally matters. And so my first taste of all things continuous improvement was a very close frontline application, specifically from the people lens. Like, full stop. That was what I was doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there any favorite examples that come to mind of helping, draw out and facilitate those improvement ideas from people at Boeing?
There's a lot of examples. I think the first thing that came to mind when you asked was actually that I think highlights the emphasis and just that tension on, whose ideas do we care about. At the time, immediately prior to me starting, there had been a big push to standardize the frontline metrics across the factories. And there had been a decision to standardize the template, the format, the little whatever stands they were on. And whoever had made that decision had not engaged the frontline teams. They had just deposited these new metric stands in the factory. And maybe unsurprisingly, many of them ended up upside down in the garbage because they were not in the right spot. And even if they were, you were putting something in someone's workspace. Out of one side of your mouth, you're saying, this is your area. You're accountable for this. We want you to improve it. This, this pride of ownership. And then on the other hand, but at any point in time, we can just throw this metric stand wherever we want it, right? And both are true, and that tension is there. And so some of the first work I was involved in was just going out and, okay, we got to have the visible metrics. Like, that's a non-negotiable. But what if we actually talked to the team leads and the teams and asked them how they wanted to do it and asked them where it went? And does it really matter if they all look identical or not? Who's that for? And maybe it does, right? Sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. But let's get really clear on who this is for and who actually owns it. So that's an example that stuck with me early on. Like, I was actually a little tickled by seeing things in the garbage can. You can imagine there was a lot of consternation and a lot of conversations about that.
I mean, somebody might say, well, thank you for your feedback that you...
Yes, thank you. Loud and clear.
Rather than just ignoring the boards or pretending like they're not there. I mean, somebody to some degree might have thought they were dirty, dangerous, and or dumb.
Correct.
They're cluttering up our space. It's getting in the way, and it seems dumb. But I mean, I think I appreciate what you're talking about, this need to navigate I think of, John Shook. I had, an opportunity to learn. He really helped me solidify this a long time ago, of him describing the Toyota production system as being both bottom up and top down.
Mm-hmm.
That this is not just expecting the workers to fix everything in the system. There's a lot that they can fix, and they are best to fix. But balance, or in some cases, I could see it being a tension between some top down needs, but getting input at the same time.
Absolutely. And I think that tension and that balance of top down, bottom up is critical to leading improvement work. When I was doing the high performance work team stuff, we talk about what's it mean to be an empowered team. Well, I mean, it is all about within a scope and a direction. So some of what we would do is, okay, what are the metrics for this area? What is the scope of this work? Because the reality is we're not asking for any and all possible improvement ideas. If the team decided that today we want to build a boat instead of an F-22, well, I mean, that's a silly example, but no, we're here to do a certain thing. Right. But that matters because without any direction or any constraints, work and improvement can be quite overwhelming, actually. What is it that I'm literally authorized to do? Because if you just say you want my ideas, and then I start giving you ideas about something you actually don't want to improve, or that you actually don't think I should be weighing in on, well, that feels pretty bad, actually. Just tell me up front, what my parameters are.
Yeah. And then I think we avoid we want you to feel trap of we want you to feel like you have input. Wait, or because if we told people we want your input and then we reject it, they're not feeling like they have input, but they're also not having input. Or we want you to feel like you own this metrics board. Are you gonna let us own it?
Are you gonna do I or do I not? I don't want to feel like I own it. I want to either own it or I don't own it. And again, I think using that example, had folks straight up just said, here's what we're doing and why, and here's why it's a requirement that it has to be this way, I think even that would have gone a long way. But that's clearly not what was what happened. It just kind of showed up in the night, and it's you guys got to use this. It's treat people like adults, treat people like professionals. I think that's also part of being respectful. Yeah. There's going to be disagreements sometimes, right? It doesn't always mean everyone's going to agree, but at least don't lie. Let's just know the score and have a conversation about it, and compromise when needed.
Yeah. Well, and hospitals sometimes make similar mistakes. Huddle boards get slapped up on the wall and they don't get used, or boards go up in patient rooms. When I've visited family members, I mean, there's always some sort of communication board, and it's hardly ever used. Even in terms of nurse's name, or there's good intention, but boy, it seems like there's an engagement issue. And I'm not blaming the nurses and techs and staff for being unengaged, but you see these disconnects. Somebody has the power to put these things up on the wall, but they're not able to influence people to participate.
Yeah, I think whenever I see a visibility system or any tool, example that's not being used, I mean, the question I often ask my clients is well, are we leading in a way that makes this thing relevant? It's one thing to do it. It might be that those boards are helpful for some and not helpful for others. Clearly, it's not currently, if someone's not using it, that means clearly it's not part of their current workflow. Right. Is that a problem or not? Well, TBD, who's it for? If the communication board is for the nurse and the patients, well, I would want to talk to them about why they are or are not using it. Right. If it's for a communication between nurses and leaders, well, then I would ask, well, leaders, what questions are you asking, or what's happening that's making it not being used? Clearly, it's okay that it's not being used because it's not being used and no one's doing anything about it. Was it just an idea? Just someone thought it would be cool, or something that you saw somewhere else and thought we want to be just like them?
That happens.
Yeah,
we visited some organization. You and I have been on some of these hospital visits.
Oh, yeah.
People take pictures and they dutifully recreate what was in the picture, meaning the board, but it's harder to photograph the mindsets and the behaviors that lead to the board being used enthusiastically.
Yeah, and so many of these things they're on a maturity model too, right? It takes practice to get really good with your boards, or your first pass at a board might just be a board with your name on it and a have a nice day. And maybe that's actually a really cool, good first intervention for some problem.
Yeah.
Right. But to go from that all the way to maybe sophisticated, proactive, measurements or situational awareness items, like that's a whole different situation. And so sometimes it can take a few steps to get there, and a few steps in multiple directions too.
Yeah. And you're making me think of another situation. I'm curious if you've seen the same thing where people are hesitant to use some sort of A3 template or even a simplified PDSA template. And, people would say, like, they have this hesitation of like, well, but I'm not good at this. And there's this trap where they kind of hold back. I think they're afraid they're going to be judged. And like, well, how are we going to get, to your point, how are we going to get good at it if we don't do some bad ones first and hopefully have a good coach who's helping us improve?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and it reminds me of another thing I feel a lot and say a lot with my clients is improvement work is inherently vulnerable. And right, like we can make it sound so easy to use a viz board or whatever, an A3. But if you think about it, if you're making your thinking visible, or what you don't know. Like if you're sitting, hey, tell this story in one page. Well, one of my favorite quotes attributed to Mark Twain is, I would have written a shorter letter, but I didn't have the time.
Right.
To concisely get down to one page takes many, many, many iterations and is sharp thinking at that point. Yeah. And that's hard. And so, I think it can be, folks want to start, we'll start by using an A3. Great. That can be a wonderful way to start. Again, if your coach or if the person kind of leading the effort knows how hard that is, or knows how hard it is for the people you're working with. Maybe it's easy. Some people will take to it. And for other people, it might be illuminating, again, that people side of improvement. It might be illuminating some things you weren't even anticipating. Like, making their thinking visible can be super scary for a lot of reasons.
Yeah. And it can be easy to lose sight of that as we gain more experience and confidence and competence in doing something.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Or again, I mean, as leaders too, I think it's easy to forget how scary it can be. Like you're reporting out your day-to-day work to someone. Like that, not everybody's comfortable with that. And so to all of a sudden, well, okay, we're going to put our performance on the wall. Well, great. That could be quite true. What's going to happen to me if my performance isn't good? Even if the leader is the kindest, sweetest, and it's safe to fail or all that, that doesn't mean the person feels that way or that they're comfortable, quote, failing in front of their peers.
Right.
There's so many factors that could be really scary, and that's humbling. And, to have to put yourself out there and be like, oh, it's fine. It's okay if you're off status. Is it?
Yeah.
According to who? Does the person think it's okay?
Yeah. Are we just saying that, or is it really true?
Yeah.
And then there's the feelings people put upon themselves. I mean, one thing I've learned, and I wish I knew it earlier, is don't tell people how to feel.
Oh yeah.
You should feel comfortable. You should feel safe. Each person decides. How can we help them feel comfortable enough to take a few steps forward and test if it's safe in the way we react or the way we're treating them.
Yeah, no, exactly right. Just saying something's safe doesn't make it so.
Yeah. Jenn, I wanted to ask a little bit more about thoughts about Boeing before we talk about some of your career arc of changing to go into healthcare. I know there are a lot of long connections of Boeing people helping Seattle area hospitals.
Absolutely.
Deep ways and meaningful ways. But, I know you worked in the defense side of the business, and there are these different parts of Boeing, and you've been away from it for a while. But I just want to ask, a kind of open-ended question of like, what's your reaction, seeing the stories about Boeing's struggles, especially on the commercial side of things. Some of these things are in the news are tough to read about some of the struggles the company has. And
I honestly, the word for me is it's heartbreaking. Again, I was on the defense side, and Boeing is an enormous company. And at the time, people, I live in Seattle. People, oh, you work at Boeing, you must know so and so. It's like, nope, it's a gigantic company, and the defense is almost like a separate company from commercial, and yet it's not. No, it's heartbreaking because the folks I worked with, just passionate, committed crafts people who care about building those aircraft.
Yeah.
And I know, especially a lot of career people, I worked with a lot of folks whose whole career was with Boeing. And I can only imagine the anger and hurt and like that people must be feeling. It's not fair to the folks who go to work every day and do their best work, or who were escalating problems that didn't get resolved. I mean, I think it's pretty gross and disturbing, and it's heartbreaking. I was reflecting though as well. Again, I was an early career professional, naive, and but I remember snippets of a conversation of some of the folks who were, my trainers, I guess.
Yeah.
Griping, I'll use the word griping about the phrase, well, the reality is the shareholder's not our customer, the Air Force is. So we're going to ignore all that noise. Meaning because at the time there was starting to be that language around shareholder value. And I was young and naive, and I didn't quite, I knew what that meant. But now, reflecting on my career and thinking through the implications of, are you focused on improving the business for shareholder value, or are you focused on improving for the people who fly in your airplanes?
Right.
Those are very different situations.
Right.
And I think that's, a big part of the situation.
Yeah. Well, and hopefully focusing on the Air Force, the pilots, their safety and their well-being and their mission. You would hope that would flow through.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely.
To the bottom line, right?
Of course. And I will say, like, for me, I worked with folks. I never experienced anything except the utmost commitment to high quality where I worked. I'll go on the record as saying that. Like, and so I was shocked as well. Like, I was like, that's not the company I worked for. Like, that was not my experience.
Sure.
And I found it shocking. Like, and now who knows, right? Different branches of things, but I found it shocking.
Yeah. And as a bridge to talking more about healthcare, I think everything that you said in terms of your reactions and feelings about that situation could apply very closely, replacing a few words in reaction to, let's say, some hospital is given, a D patient safety grade by Leapfrog Group. And you might say there are a lot of talented, highly educated, caring people in this organization, and yet somehow our performance is failing or close to, or not where it could be.
Absolutely.
Or where it needs to be. Similar dynamics where you could say it's unfair to the people working there, who are often kind of put in a system that's not designed to perform.
Absolutely. It's completely unfair to the people who show up every day, work really hard, deal with, heroic acts, work horrendously long shifts, understaffed, not having what they need, problems not getting resolved fast enough. That is also heartbreaking and sadly not shocking. And we've normalized that across many industries. I'm not just talking about healthcare,
and I think some of it is not that people like it, but they think it can't be better.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it can. I mean, it can.
And that's proven in some pockets of healthcare and some organizations that we've been at or worked with. But what was your career transition then, going from aerospace to healthcare? What sparked that? What led to that opportunity, that interest?
Yeah. So after a few years of kind of doing the lean thing with Boeing, again, loved it, learned a ton. And soon, I knew I mean, with my earlier aspirations to maybe be a teacher or a social worker or a comedian, like I was never passionate about building military aircraft. I thought the company was cool. I met amazing people. It just wasn't for me. And I knew, getting up at 4:45 in the morning or sometimes
Yeah.
being on site at 4:45 to lead a workshop, it just was not, it was not me. And yeah, in
Yeah.
order to grow my career there, I would have needed to be very committed in a way that I wasn't.
Mhm.
And
Sure.
I was always interested in supporting a nonprofit. And so I started kind of looking around like, oh, this whole lean thing, that's a job. And, so then I started
Yeah.
researching. I was like, oh my gosh, like Seattle Children's does this? Whoa, like, a significant, important institution in the Seattle area. I was a
Yeah.
patient there when I was a baby. So I was like, whoa,
Oh,
cool. And so I saw the opportunity and I was like, heck yes. And
yeah.
I applied and then it's like, hey, this could be pretty cool. And it was.
Yeah. And I had opportunity to visit Seattle Children's 3, maybe 4 times, different sites, the main
Mm-hmm.
hospital, surgical center that was
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
new. I remember, some innovative aspects of the design
Mm-hmm.
for flow in a very patient and family centered way. So, yeah, I mean, Seattle Children's, seemed like one of those organizations where there were really a lot of good things happening. We had exposure
Mm-hmm.
to that through the Healthcare Value Network.
Yeah, they were early
Yeah.
adopters of continuous improvement and lean in healthcare.
Yeah. So, I mean, what did you learn coming into healthcare? Like, kind of expectations versus actual of,
Oh, yeah.
that environment.
Yeah, it's tough. The first thing I learned was how challenging the concept of like frontline metrics and standard work was. And
Mhm.
it surprised me that
Yeah.
in healthcare that was a challenging concept. So
Mhm.
I guess I'd made the assumption like, oh yeah, all this stuff makes complete sense. I had no background in building aircraft, but I understood how all of these concepts applied, and I
Mhm.
understood how they could apply then in with tweaking in any situation. Like to me, because I was not a mechanic or an engineer, I took the concepts as a kind of a guiding philosophy
Mhm.
that you then apply. And so for me, like, oh, healthcare, yeah, of course this applies. Now, not that there's not nuance, not that, things are always contextual. So I was a bit shocked
Yeah.
by that, like, oh, okay, like that's a hard thing. Or I think what stood out to me as well, this might sound naive, uh, differences in like who defines quality and
Mhm.
quality tolerances, right? How much
Mhm.
harder that is. Whereas again, if you're building an aircraft, the tolerance levels are defined. What is and is not a defect is clearly defined. What the customer, the person purchasing the product, is willing to accept
Mhm.
is clearly defined. And oftentimes in healthcare, it's about benchmarks. It's about
Yeah.
rates. I mean, obviously for specific procedures, there's right, there's wrong and all that, but like, or done correctly, performed incorrectly. But in terms of like quality levels or rates, like how you're good enough is about, well, compared to our peers, we're the best. So that makes
Yeah.
us the best. And that's hard. And that I
Right.
feel for folks, that's very hard to uh, know
Well,
how much effort, or I don't know that I'm totally making sense, but that
no,
stood
you
out
are.
to me as how that's hard.
Right.
Like
Right.
what is acceptable and not acceptable, and how do
Mhm.
you, I don't know, I have a lot of compassion for folks working in that environment.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
but in a literally
It's
life and death environment with a
right.
lot of sometimes gray area or priorities not always being, or the definition of success not always being crystal clear and not
Right.
being designed for, if
Mhm.
that makes sense. Again, I'm
Yeah.
probably not honoring the complexity appropriately, but
Well, but there are a lot of deeply ingrained habits and mindsets. I think we've heard people in healthcare. We've probably heard John Toussaint say it. Benchmarking sometimes shows you're the best of a bad bunch,
yeah, and
and
that's
and and
hard.
being and that's harsh. Or I'm trying to attribute that phrase to somebody I feel like has earned the right to say it more than me. But,
no, totally. Yeah.
But I think if, there's a stated goal. We want to be top decile. Well, everybody can't be top decile, but if everybody was really working at that, it would be raising the bar of what performance was necessary to even be above average.
Yes. Well, and I guess that's why I have so much compassion, because especially in healthcare, when your job is literally healing and helping save lives and prevent, injuries and infections, of course you're striving for perfection. I mean, of course. And so then the fact that the systems inherently are designed to just go after benchmarking against potentially a bad bunch. I'm not talking about the people involved. I'm talking about the outcomes of the system.
Right. Exactly.
That's where I'm like, that's really hard, that the system is then fundamentally set up not to eliminate those problems and make it as easy as possible for the folks doing the work to have it go exactly how they want. Yeah. It's not set up that way. It's not set up to make it as easy as possible for those doing that work to have it go as easy as it could, as well as it could. And that's what makes me really sad. And that's what I found shocking and just heartbreaking. Yeah. Like, that's how we should be focusing things. Like, how do you make it as easy as possible for everyone to deliver the care how they want to deliver it, and for the patients to receive the care how they want to receive it.
Yeah. Now, the flip side of that, and sometimes in the same hour, I vacillate wildly between these two views of like, there's the sad, discouraging, sometimes current state. And then there's but oh my gosh, it could be so much better. And a lot of this really is fixable.
Oh, yeah.
And
there's so much amazing work happening to make it better. And so it's also a happy story too.
Yeah. So what were some of your favorite happy stories from Seattle Children's and helping people improve?
Oh, goodness. I'd have to really spend some time thinking about that. I think anytime you're doing facility design stuff, mostly because I really love simulating processes. I really like how you setting up experiments to test things and make changes with your hands. And I think that was something that I missed a lot. In manufacturing, it was more normal to just mock stuff up and start playing with things. Yeah. And so I'm excited that in healthcare, that's becoming more and more normal to simulate all kinds of things, to work with your hands and make improvements now. So any kind of work around, whether it was 5S, supplies, closer to point of use, designing spaces for flow, those were always my favorite projects, because you were getting stuff done and you were getting it done now. And like you were making improvements based upon your idea that didn't pan out and like able to make real-time changes. But I will say, this is silly, within my first 3 months at Children's, I knew I'd made a good choice of like switching to healthcare. I'm just doing a time observation, right, in a clinic. And I kid you not, a toddler took their first steps to me. Like there I am just doing a time observation, and there's this kid waiting for their sibling, in a different room with their caretaker. And like the kid and the person they were with like told me, no, this was the kid's first step. Like we were just kind of playing in the hallway. I was like, man, this work matters so much. Not my time observation, right? But like who we were doing it for. Right. And again, just like, wow, this like whatever changes come of this improvement work, it's going to make it so that little toddler's waiting less time, like whatever, like that their sibling is going to have to come back here less. And like, that's amazing. And to have that real up close and personal, like, oh no, the customer's right here. Yeah. They're inside the building, right? Like it's a big deal that like who you're helping is right there. And it's very just amazing. So any interactions where, and Children's is very good about involving patients and families in improvement work as well, either via focus groups or I did do some improvement work or supported improvement work around some pain management protocols. And one of the improvements was making it easier to, visualize in the packaging for the medication to make sure you're taking the right medication. And we consulted with teenagers,
Yeah.
Actually ask people, what do you think? And I think that anytime I got to do that was super cool.
Well, I'm trying to remember. I think I remember seeing mock-ups. I forget if Seattle Children's did a lot of cardboard or like the plastic sheeting. I've seen different types of full-scale mock-ups.
Oh, yeah. Children's did the cardboard full-scale mock-ups.
Like in a parking garage or
some
space.
Yeah, some warehouses. And well, then I think one of my first projects I was helping with when I started there too was we were redesigning the flu room. And it was a small room, and we didn't have the space yet. And so we started kind of mocking things up as best we could on paper. And then we just took out some painter's tape and mocked it up on the floor. Right. Mm-hmm. Like, again, it doesn't always have to be like, if you've got the square footage, just get some tape out and start seeing what you can do.
Yeah. I did the same thing at home recently. We were talking about buying some furniture and we had measurements, and I got out measuring tape, and I didn't create an exact tape outline, but I marked off on the wall, like, here's the distance, and my wife and I could both look at it. And, I didn't create a cardboard couch. In Texas, a cowboy couch is probably some style of couch. That's a thing.
Yeah, it probably is.
We didn't do the full cardboard mock-up, but sometimes, like, just to test your assumptions of, like, we're assuming that's going to work well in the space. Like, just little simple things like that are sometimes helpful at home even.
Oh, absolutely. I remember the time we did not properly account for the size of a new fridge that we bought. Mm-hmm. We did have to take that back. I mean, technically it fit, but it was absurd in the space. But you can't really know. Had we, maybe did a tape line, we might be like, oh, it goes out that deep? That's weird.
Yeah. So, little mistakes. Not our favorites, not our biggest. But so I'd love to hear about your transition then into consulting in your firm, 7 Ways Consulting, that transition and what you learned about being on the outside looking in or helping as opposed to being inside as an employee.
Yeah. So probably maybe halfway through my career at Seattle Children's, just like I knew at Boeing, I didn't ultimately want to be, like a Boeing company person for the rest of my life. I knew, obviously I don't have a clinical background. And so I knew pretty early it wasn't my goal to be a hospital administrator. Like that wasn't my goal. I just really like improvement work. Yeah. And I'm industry agnostic. And so even though I was at Children's for over 11 years, I never viewed myself as a healthcare person, right? Just as someone who I was passionate about working at Seattle Children's. Sure. But I identify as an improvement professional, I guess. And so working there, was so fortunate to just meet folks from across the country, across the world, leading improvement efforts in healthcare and being part of various networks of learning and sharing. I realized how satisfying that was to share ideas and learn and make new connections. And so I thought, hey, it could be kind of fun maybe to do this. Maybe that's what I want to do is professional. Maybe that's what it looks like to be an improvement professional ultimately. So I kind of started dipping my toe in the water, and, you get some referrals and friends of friends. And then I realized, like, this could be cool. And this is how I stay industry agnostic is I would either have to just move companies and lead things internally, or what if I just did it myself and did it my way and see what that feels like. And then I have the freedom and luxury to define how it goes and be flexible and adaptable and not have to adapt to the way the organization's talking about it right now or adapt my vision or how I would want to do it. So there's a lot of freedom there. And, being an external, people are specifically paying you and investing in improvement. They are saying, we want to do this and we want to do it now, and we are making an investment in it. Whereas I think sometimes when you're internal, it's easy to become maybe part of the problem or part of the system, or just taken for granted, or, just another thing to do. So.
Yeah, and I think there's an opportunity sometimes, or I think of like the level of psychological safety you feel as an outsider is higher because what do you have to lose by speaking an uncomfortable truth or fact? Like you may lose a client, but finding a new client's less traumatic than finding a new job where somebody feels, oh, I can't say this internally, I'll get fired. But you can say that because you're an outsider. I think to
Yeah, I
lean
think.
into that sometimes is helpful to the team you're working with there.
Yeah, and even when I led a team of internal consultants, I mean, strategically using external consultants is appropriate as well to help share different messages. And for me, I'm the kind of person that I cannot not speak my mind.
Mm-hmm.
That
Yeah.
is the way I operate. And
Yeah.
so, and I strongly believe, though, leaders need to choose their coaches as
Mm-hmm.
well. So there's also a
Mm-hmm.
time and a place to be an external. I mean, again, like about building the relationship and having the right relationship. And especially, okay, if you're an executive leadership team, building that relationship and choosing that relationship with who you want to guide you and what the right resource is for you at any given time, I think matters. And I think it's probably multiple resources, right?
Yeah.
Multiple sources of inspiration. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
always excited to be part of that choice.
Yeah.
Versus when you're internal, sometimes you're also inherited.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? Like you've been there for 20 years and that's who we work with. Well, that doesn't always mean it's going to be the right match for
Sure.
where the organization's going next.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
From either side.
Yeah. And you talk about my way, I mean, meaning your way, and 7 ways.
Yes.
Some people listening might not know the origin of what that phrase means. And
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So 7 ways is one of my favorite activities to lead as a facilitator that I think brings together both the facilitator role, kind of a consulting role, and a coach role at the same time. So for folks who don't know, it's typically part of facility design, not always, but big breakthrough process redesign. You will engage in a 7 ways exercise where after you've been defining the problem you're trying to solve, or multiple problems that you're trying to solve, you have participants literally come up with and draw or mock up 7 different ways they would solve that problem. And you push, I mean, 7's an arbitrary number, but you push because it's hard, because you can easily come up with 3 ideas. 5 ideas starts getting challenging. By the time you get to 7 ideas, it usually gets a little weird and pretty playful and creative, and you're encouraged to look to nature. And I love everything about the exercise because it pushes your thinking, it gets you out of your comfort zone. It's very collaborative, it's fun, it's silly, it becomes very tangible. And so, yeah, I knew that was what I wanted to call myself. And my book definitely is based around a lot of that thinking of approaching problems a little bit differently and creatively.
well, that's a great segue to what I wanted to talk about next, and what you probably wanted to talk about. And like, let's get to it. But again, Jenn Christison's book is Even Better Leadership: Provocative Reflections to Guide Improvement. One thing for those, I'm going to point out for those who are just listening, Jenn's office and background colors are very compatible with the color scheme of the book. That's by design, right?
Not an accident, on brand. Yeah.
But tell us the story about the book, and the format and the approach to it is unique. And so I'd love to hear you kind of tell the story of why the book and why this way, because it's a unique approach.
Yeah. So, I mean, multiple reasons for why this book. There's the personal reason and the like more specific for the reader. So personally, as a coach and as a leader, most of my work is helping guide other people's projects or visions or bring other people's improvements to life. And so it was important to me to spend time and invest time in bringing one of my ideas to life and invest in my more creative pursuits and take the time to do that and have a physical manifestation of my creativity. So I set a deadline, I set a budget, and I was like, dang it, I'm going to finish a book. Because I have other books in process that have just been like withering away that I've done nothing with, and I'm sick of it. And I was like, I need to finish a book, and then I'll know how to do it. And then if I like that, I can do more. So that was how it started, as just a passion project that I wanted to, again, just have it done so that I could do it for me. And as I started that journey, it was a kernel of an idea, actually inspired by how much I enjoy like word a day calendars.
Yeah.
So like you just have it on your desk and this little like moment of reflection to focus on something that you kind of like to nerd out about, whether it's your French lesson or weird words or whatever. And I was like, man, wouldn't it be cool if like leaders could have a little like prompt to think about, you know? I was like, oh, that's fun. So then I started writing a bunch of prompts.
Yeah.
And then I was like, well, I don't just want to write a book of prompts. Like what's the purpose? Like, why am I doing this? Why are leaders my audience? And ultimately, you know, like I say with my business, there's not one way to do things. There's at least 7 ways, right? But there's also some ways are better than others. And so I didn't just want to ask a bunch of open-ended questions of leaders like, oh, let's just think big and weird and creatively. Like, well, that can be overwhelming. Like, no, let's be deliberate. Let's take time out to pause and reflect and think about, you know, what's important, who we want to be, how we want to lead. How do I even know how I'm doing? How do I know what I want to focus on next? That can be very overwhelming. So I wanted to help focus leaders' efforts. And I wanted to do it in kind of a fun and stimulating way. I wanted the book to look like something you might like to have on your desk.
Right.
Right. It's square. It is big font. It is very colorful. It is inspired by coffee table books and children's books. Yeah. Like it is meant to be engaging and playful and something that's hopefully like stimulating that you don't dread picking up. That you're like, oh, this is time for me to like focus and figure out what I want to do next.
And it reminds me also of a Tom Peters book, if you're familiar with his work. Not quite as frenetic and like Tom's energy just jumps off the page at you, but this is both in terms of color. This is more calm and reflective. You know, is my perception of it. And one thing that's unique is there are quite certainly more questions for the reader than there are statements. And, you know, there are some statements and stories. So I'm just, you know, curious to hear your thoughts on that approach. Is this based off of what you've learned about asking questions in the context of coaching?
Yeah. So this book is not about me telling or sharing my expertise and telling people how to lead necessarily. It's about providing a framework of things to consider for the reader to decide its relevance to them. So yeah, it's meant to be almost like kind of having a mini coach there with you. I do think by specifically defining what I'm calling just 12 leadership responsibilities, they're not the only leadership responsibilities. They're the ones that I thought were very important. And I give fairly rigorous definition of what I think good looks like. And that's it. Yeah, that's the only kind of opinion I'm putting out there is, hey, here's a paragraph. What do you think? You tell me where it's wrong. Is this relevant to you or not? Let's talk about it. And yeah, that is very emblematic of how I work as a coach and how I support leaders and teams in developing. What is relevant to you right now? Why is it relevant? If you don't agree with it, you're not going to do it. Yeah. And I think especially if you're going to lead, it requires having some opinions and having some deliberate ideas about what you're doing and why and what you want the intended outcome to be. And if you're if you're not able to spend time wrestling with that, you're probably not going to make much progress. And so I want this book to be that space for leaders to wrestle a little bit and get clear on what matters now and what good looks like, and then figure out what their next step is to try it.
Yeah. And one of these, 12, just read a little bit of the page on prioritizing quality as you've defined it. And I think touching on something you've mentioned earlier, proactively defined acceptable outcomes. And then this part, I think, really resonates with me as well. Kind of, I'll call it the duality of having methods to achieve those outcomes with as few errors as possible. So there's like mistake proofing and good process. But all errors are rapidly identified and analyzed, and the work environment, and I love the fact you use that phrase of not just the process, the work environment is adjusted to prevent similar problems from repeating in the future. That's a great synopsis of, defects or mistakes. And I'm curious if you want to add some color to like that dual nature of like, we're trying to prevent mistakes, but they still happen. So let's use them to drive improvement.
Yeah, no, it's funny that you picked that leadership responsibility, because I do think it's one of the more provocative ones in the book, I think, to specifically lay out this. I'm saying as a leader, this is your responsibility to prioritize quality. Oh boy, that's a load. Okay, but what does that mean? And like you call out, well, it means defining acceptable. Okay, shoot, that's a whole thing in and of itself. How do you define what is and is not acceptable? And it involves then making it easy to do acceptable every time. And
make it easy to,
make it easy to do that. Give folks what they need to meet acceptable, or even better than acceptable. And then, things are going to happen because the process might change. The environment might change. Something might come at you that you can't control. So how are you going to support people in fixing that? So there's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot of different skills and thinking and tools to make that a reality. And it's not easy to do.
But
so,
it's important. I was thinking of the President John F. Kennedy quote: "We do these things not because they are easy, but because they are hard, or because they're important."
Exactly. And it's not easy, and it will take practice, and you'll get it wrong sometimes. And then again, yes, errors are going to happen. How do you make sure the same error doesn't happen twice?
Yeah. So, in early errors, small errors, if we learn from them, prevent big errors. I was curious if you could talk about sort of like, what sort of iterative process you went through in the development of the book.
Oh, yes. Oh, boy. I went through a lot of it, just from concept. I mean, in terms of iterations, not an error, but an iteration. It was going to be 365, like a prompt a day. And then I was like, this is overwhelming. And I was like, this is kind of overwhelming. And in service of what? I had different categories. But once I anchored it around what is this reflection in service of? It's not just reflecting for reflection's sake. It's reflecting to guide improvement. And I was like, well, but improvement, what are we changing? Okay, our specific leadership responsibilities. So kind of backing into the framework actually I didn't start with the framework. It emerged as I wrote the book. But I will say the other big iteration, I wanted it originally in my head, there was going to be more like pictures or graphics a little bit, but that became quite unwieldy, and it just started to not make sense. And when I did a little bit of testing with some of the imagery versus just the bold colors with some people, it was unanimous that people just really liked the bold colors. And so I had to let go of what I wanted and say, this book isn't just for me, it's actually for the reader. And if the readers like it bold, then bold it shall be.
Yeah.
So always an iterative process. But I also will say, setting your budget and your deadline is critical, because otherwise I would still be iterating on this book to this day and I would never stop. So sometimes you need to just say, this version is the version, and
Yep.
the next version will be something else.
Yep. And hopefully then, gosh, if there's a typo, it's almost inevitable that there still is a typo, even with
Oof.
copy editing and proofreading.
Oh, you're giving me panic. Did you find a typo? Don't tell me. Oh my gosh.
I did not. I mean, I think every book ever printed,
oh, I'm sure,
has had, at least a typo, because there are not 7 ways to spell a certain word.
No.
No.
Oh gosh.
Maybe sometimes 2, but
yeah.
But no, it's not because I found something, but I know it's still heartbreaking and crushing to see it.
Yes.
Like, how does that happen? It happens.
Oh yeah.
But maybe a final question for you, Jen. And again, the book is Even Better Leadership. People can buy this through your website.
Yes, they can buy it through my website. You can find it on Amazon. You could buy it direct from the publisher. I have a coupon code if that's appropriate to share.
It is.
Okay.
As long as the code is appropriate.
Yes. It's not a provocative coupon code. So if you buy direct from the publisher, that's bookbaby.com, and you use the code evenbetter10, so even better spelled out number 10, you'll get 10% off between now and Halloween. It's a spooktacular savings. So yeah, there you go.
Well, good. So that was funny. So I'm going to ask you a final question. Like, when it comes to stand-up comedy, I've never done that. But I'm fascinated by, like, there was a Jerry Seinfeld documentary a long time ago at this point now of like the process where like you watch the Netflix special, oh my God, that's an amazing 45 minutes of comedy. But it's not like that just gets written down in a notepad. There's iteration, there's testing, there's feedback. I'm curious, like, what your process has been. Is it iterative, or what have you experienced?
It's completely iterative, and you don't know, and even you don't know what's going to land. Or I go back and read something that I thought was pretty good, little 5-minute thing, and now I'm like, oh, that's terrible. The whole thing needs to be completely reworked. How did I even remotely think this was okay? And I'm embarrassed for the people that laughed. Right? It's a very humbling process, because so much of it is, making it very tight and focused and relevant, but relevant can change depending on who's in the room. So it's not easy, but very fun. And yes, 100% iterative, always evolving.
Yeah. And I'm sure there's stories of times where you felt like, as what comedians say, you either killed or you bombed, or something in between.
Yeah, I think, I know I've killed once. Everything else is something in between. But I think the expectations were pretty low. I killed my first time. So,
well, it keeps you wanting to go back and try again, at least, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Well, maybe we'll see you at a Lean conference sometime, tapping into, because there are things that are funny to some audiences, right? So, lean jokes.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Maybe Lean conferences could use a little more funny sometimes.
Oh yeah, everything could.
Well, Jen, thank you for doing the episode here. Again, congratulations on the release of the book. You answered the one question I like to ask authors of, are you going to do another? And it sounds like you are.
Oh yeah, I got several in the hopper.
Well, good.
Potentially a sequel or two for this one, and I've got the first book I've written that isn't finished yet still to come.
Well, that'd be a good excuse to have you back on the podcast.
Oh, I'd love it. It's been a blast.
All right, it has. Thanks again.
Thanks, Mark.